All right. My name is Evan, and you are listening to Left of the Projector, and we bring you tonight a classic movie that it's a shame that I has taken this long to put this one out on the podcast. We're doing Sorry to Bother You, the 2018 Boots Riley movie. And with me to discuss, I have Comrade James, founder of Comrade Workwear, and Ryan Howes of Conscious Environment Creation Podcast, or I might have messed it
Yeah,
up.
but it's a podcast. It's everything.
It's everything. Well, thank you both for coming on.
Of
Yeah.
course, happy to be here.
Yeah. So as an aside note, Ryan and I were talking about doing this movie a couple months ago, and then a couple of the other people I think had to bail, and I'm finally got to get this one. And I mentioned to you, James, you're like, this is one of my favorite movies, and I'm like, perfect. This will be great. I still remember the first time I saw this movie, and I feel like it's one of the best reveals in a movie, like third act of a movie that I can think
Oh,
of in recent
yeah.
memory.
Oh
And
yeah, I love it.
And easily one of, if not the best, I would say, left movie ever made. I mean, at
It's a
least in modern
masterpiece.
times, it's really yeah. So I know maybe just your first overall impressions without too many superlatives, although you can have lots of them. Just and then we'll get into the movie.
You want to start us off, Ryan?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing that I really noticed about this movie is, yes, it's left leaning, but the hero of the story isn't left leaning. Like he almost comes across like a centrist to like a moderate. Like he doesn't mind the status quo as long as it's benefiting him, but he's not so bad as to he doesn't sell out like his group. He sells them out by not aiding them. Like he sits back, and that's almost worse. Like because he didn't make any decisions one way or another with the unionization and all that, because he never made a initial decision on how he felt about it. He ends up doing more harm by not speaking up. Like they keep trying to get him to come to their side because they think that the star seller for this company would be benefiting if they were just on their side to begin with. And I hadn't noticed that the first time I watched it. I really thought like, oh, like all the characters are pretty left leaning and the bad guy is obvious, but it felt more gray this time I watched it.
Yeah, I actually picked on that. I mean, like I saw it in other ones, but I picked on it a little heavier this watch. And I don't know if I saw him just as much as like a centrist, as much as I saw him as like an opportunist becomes professional managerial class, sort of like PMC. And so he starts out, and remember, like when his uncle comes out and he's like, and he like does this like landlord critique, like they're like he's holding housing above him. He's like, I'm your uncle. Like, what are you fucking talking about?
Right.
And so it's like easy for him to be opinionated against this thing that is clearly that's like clearly against him or like not benefiting. And then as soon as it's benefiting, I think he says he's like, I'm gonna root for you from the bench when
Yes.
him and his friend come in confrontation. And I love that argument that happened right there. It's sort of like a honey roast argument, like they're just like being super nice to each other, but like really aggressively. And it felt so emblematic of like liberalism, as it's experienced, because it's clearly violent, it's clearly aggressive, but it's laden with sort of this sweetness. And so that's kind of how I kind of understood Cash in this moment. He thinks that these other people can still do their things and exist and like make some kind of progress, and then he can still like get his piece. And you realize that that's impossible.
Yeah. So just as a quick, I think those are both good observations. And as a quick, for anyone who hasn't seen this, you should pause this podcast and go watch it and then come back. But for those who have seen it or don't care to be spoiled, the general plot of this movie is that Cash and his girlfriend, played by Tessa Thompson, Cash is played by Lakeith Stanfield, a master. Well, everyone in this movie is perfectly played. But so Tessa Thompson plays Detroit, Cash's girlfriend, and like you mentioned, James, they live in a garage essentially of their uncle's house, where the housing is, they can barely afford that to pay him anything, and he's looking for a job. He has very little prospects, and he essentially goes to work at a telemarketing company, and we follow his ascent from just, I can't do this job, it's not really something I'm able to do, and he gets advice from Langston, who's played by Danny Glover, to kind of alter his voice, as I will get into, to kind of have a white voice, to connect with the people he's talking to. And we see him rise through the ranks, as you said also, James, like a PMC kind of petty bourgeois in some sense, aspiring to go greater, and then the falling in the final act of this movie. So, I think it's, as I said, I think everyone in this movie is great, all the actors. And you also pointed out that something you had mentioned is that there's not just Cash's character has sort of a white voice as is credited in the credits. It's also Tessa has one at one point. The Danny Glover, I believe, has one briefly. The head of Power Caller has one, played by Patton Oswalt. So I don't know what you make of, I don't know, just kind of like the it feels like almost on the nose in terms of modern day experience under capitalism of people are struggling and they're just going to take a job. And one other theme I found from this movie is just class consciousness. I think the idea of him sitting, like you said, Ryan, like on the sideline, kind of in the middle as this moderate, is I feel like there is some class consciousness, and he has the decision to be with his workers or to go join the capitalists, and we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, there was, honestly, Boots Riley is so brilliant that I feel like we could take any one like 15-second scene and talk about just that for like an hour.
Right.
I think that he is such a powerful filmmaker because he's able to make everything extremely explicit. It's on the surface. Evan and I were talking about this earlier. There's other movies that have like themes, you think about like Star Wars and like imperialism and the Vietnam War or something like that. And that it's analogous, it's a metaphor. It's something that you kind of have to peel a layer or two back. And then you're like, okay, this was the US and this is whoever. But in Boots Riley, there's no layers to peel back. It's right there in front of you. There's a lot of layers that can make it more nuanced. And if you can focus in, it increases the beauty, but it's right there. And you also don't feel like he's hitting you over the head with it.
Right.
There was actually one, like a very, very simple thing where Cash does that toast. It was like the first time he goes out with Steven Yeun's character. I forget what his name is in the movie.
I think it's Squeeze.
Squeeze. It's Squeeze, which is funny because he's trying to squeeze and he does the white voice, and it's the first time that he is not Patton Oswalt.
David Cross.
He's David Cross.
Yeah, he's David Cross. And after he's done with it, he says something like, "Guess I'm a natural." Like Langston taught me to do the white voice, and I guess I'm a natural. And it felt like this interesting moment too, where his white voice, sort of natural, is like a natural talent, was the thing that facilitated his growth in Regal View in the telemarketing company. And it was, it's one of those things where it's just luck of the draw, like talent and or like skill is something that through practice you can, increase and up level. But sometimes talent, I think, is like this. It's this natural proclivity, and talent alongside, like the birth lottery, it's things that you don't really control so much. So I'm sure that he feels like he worked hard, like it was through his merit. But he makes it clear that he's like, guess I'm a natural. And it was one of those moments of making something very explicit if you hone in on like that one singular scene.
The one thing I like about the white voice is their explanation. I don't know if you guys caught what they say the white voice is supposed to be, because he was like, "Oh yeah, I can do," because they, and I like that they kind of frame it so that it's not code switching. It's not quite that. Like that feels like a pretty easy like analogy, but right in the beginning, the Cash says to the older guy, he says to him, "Oh yeah, I can do that. Like yeah, I don't talk like this all the time, for business or whatever."
He's like, people say that I talk white, and he goes, "Not like Will Smith. That's just proper."
Right, exactly. So they talk about code switching in that little tiny moment just to explain that this next thing that we're going to show you is not an analogy for that. It is literally what they're doing. Like it's funny. I watched this movie last night with my kid who's 11, and it was interesting listening to them like try to explain what's happening in the movie, because they were like, "Is this supposed to be?" It's almost like a cartoon with like how over the top everything is. So like, is it really happening or is it in their heads? And then the screwy thing is some of it is in his head, and then the other fantastical elements are actually happening as well. But they talk about the white voice, and he says, um with
Bills
the
paid.
yeah. Sit back like you have your bills paid, like you don't have a care in the world. And like I took in my notes, the goal for the lower class, working class, is not to have a care in the world, and that is like the superficial goal that they're trying to exploit, because all the people that they're calling are working class people that they're taking advantage of. Like that's the thing. But I like that even in this world, to hammer home like white supremacy's role in capitalism, the white voice sounds like you don't have any financial hardship. So like the white voice sounds like you don't need this, you don't care. Like it's sense
worry
of
free.
calm. Yeah, it's worry free. Everything is on the everything is on the nose. But I like that was like the upper echelon of like we are the upper class talking to the lower class like we don't need this at all. And in order to do that, you have to put on your white voice. Yeah, I just thought that was really clever.
Oh, 100%. I think it's a really sort of like prosaic framing of it, because he's speaking about the white voice, and clearly, like the juxtapositions, like two black males putting on their white voice, and then so you get sort of like this the reference to code switching, but then he takes it up that one notch to go to the class critique of it,
right,
where it obviously he makes it clear that there's like this like white black divide as far as this thing is concerned, but that the reality, the manifestation, the feeling of this thing is not so much a racial reality as much as it's a class reality. I think Boots Riley can sometimes be class reductionist, but I think that framing the code switching white voice and then simultaneously placing it with the idea of financial security is a really, really powerful sort of like moment.
Well, there's so many moments in this movie where they're showing explicitly the different classes they have. Well, I wrote down sort of when he starts making his first calls, they're kind of showing like the horrors of regular people. Like where I love the scene where it like looks like he's in the living room with the different people talking with them, and it's it's brilliant. And then you have just soon after this, he's in the bar and there's like the VIP room that he wants to go into in the building where he works. There's the special elevator, the gold elevator. Everything is explicitly broken down to like you, the workers, or you're like the rich people in the top. And then within the office, there's a whole lot of like middle management. There's like 4 or 5 people within the company that are like these middle
Kate
managers.
Berlin's character is hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love this character so much.
One of the well, I know we're like talking about the wife voice, but one of the funny things when he goes in to do the interview for what is it? What's the company called? I'm blanking right
Regal
now.
View.
Regal View. When he
Regal
goes
View.
in to do the little interview, he like had forged his resume and all these
The
things.
Employee of the Month sign.
The fake trophy he
Yeah.
brought in. It's all like very. It just shows like what someone who just needs employment to live in our society is willing to go through. And when someone gives him advice where this could improve your, Danny Glover's giving him this advice, he's like willing to do it because it can take him to the next level, because that's what you're taught is that you have to do in our society.
Remember when Kate Berlant, she's like, you aren't employees. You are, she's like, we are a family. And then Cash is like, does that mean we get paid more? And she goes, not really.
I was just about to read that. That was the note that I was just about to bring up. But she says something really interesting, like, not really. And then right after that, she goes, I mean, what is capital anyway? And then she goes on this little tiny diatribe for a second, talking about how, capital isn't real and you should aspire for more meaningful things in life and you don't have to worry about money.
Social capital is more important.
She says social currency, I think she says, right?
Yeah, she says social currency. But I just thought it was interesting because it almost shows like at that point of like class tradership, right? Because they aren't really making that much more than the people on the phones. Especially compared to the big sellers up top. Like they're the ones that are actually making all the money for the company, and everybody else is just sort of everybody else. But those people with just a little bit of power above someone else, they got told that they were better than the lower person. So that's how they're acting, but they know that they're not as separated as they think. But I just think it's interesting that they have her character using or like almost taking advantage of leftist language, like using the language of the people, but to relate, but knowing that you are still trying to keep that distance because you want to be the better one. And it just kind of made me think of, I'm sure you guys have noticed. I was going to say, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but like just over the last year or so, leftist ideas being called leftist ideas has been just fumigating throughout social media, and you see people kind of co-opting this language that sounds good until you poke any holes in it or you ask like why or what, any follow-up question, and then that person doesn't have anything else to say. And that's almost like what her management at the same time telling you that you're not going to get paid more also makes the point that, money isn't real anyway. And why do we subscribe to these things? And like, what is capital in your life? Like, what could that actually be?
There's a sort of appropriation and a sterilization at the same time, like the co-opting. Yeah. It's like how the word progressive almost means nothing anymore,
Right.
Or like even like the term Medicare for all, like people on the right started using it because now it can just mean anything.
Right, yeah. Or my favorite, woke. It just like all of that stuff means whatever you want it to mean. Whatever the screenwriter needs it to.
Yeah, and I don't know if you noticed, during the little like team meeting, they had a sign behind them, and I think this is what it said. It's a team member, family, and synergy, just like buzzwords. It's like. But that's the kind of thing you would see like in a place like this. I can picture just these buzzwords like family, synergy, just words that just, they sound cool to people who are like starting out there. And and one other thing I was going to mention too is you were saying, Ryan, that the people in the main pit of like the company make very little, they're basically making mild commission. So you ask yourself, why have them there? What's the point of all these jobs that aren't really probably making them very much money? And I think it's to convince them that can get up to the next level, and you have to keep them working at this low level job to say like you could become the guy on the gold elevator. It's like this little.
Right.
Oh, you were gonna say something, James. I saw you.
I have a thought about this one. So because I was watching that, and they clearly demarcate them in dress. Besides maybe Kate Berlant, who like is like a little bit more like tightened up fashion wise, I guess. But like the other two dudes look scummy, you know, like they look like scummy little telemarketing managers. And they're old, you know, like they're older dudes. Like they clearly aren't going to, you know, make power collar. You know, they're in this just like sub managerial space. But then I thought about the idea of like power and humiliation, because there's this weird game show that they show throughout the movie. It's like get the shit kicked out of you or something like that. And it was so funny because the show is two things. The show is people in dire straits willing to submit to pain and humiliation for either like social clout or money. I assume money. You know, it's kind of like the student loan game that came out a few years ago that was really gross. Then you remember that? And then Langston, Danny Glover's character, he like Superman's open his button up and he's wearing the game show shirt and he's like, I love to see these people get humiliated. I love it, whatever. And I think that it's that space where when you're getting your neck stepped on, if you're not going to collectively try and get the necks off you and your boys, then it feels good to see someone else get their neck stepped on, or to be, even in a minor space, to be the one doing it to someone else. And that's how I saw those managers. Is it just sort of like a power dynamic that's the only power they have? So they're going to sit and relish in it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
Something I thought about with the managers that I loved, and this is kind of like the movie almost doing a little bit too much, because they never come back to this concept too much. But like the gender role reverse of sexual harassment that is in like it, like the only sexual harassment that happens that in the movie is between her and Cash, and it's in that elevator? One scene in the elevator scene that makes it definitely feel like this happens more than once. And then the AI is voiced by a woman and is hypersexual for like like all the guys. And I just thought that was just such an interesting like way to show that also, like, in the background, like this would also be happening too. Like this would also be part of this culture. It's all of these like little tiny gross things that we all smush together to be this one more awful thing. Like underneath this umbrella of an exchange of power for money is people what they would use that power for, and like how they would abuse the people below them, give it the opportunity. I just think that was an interesting kind of subversion.
I did not even think of that. That's kind of crazy.
The voice in the elevator is Rosario Dawson, actually.
That's amazing.
Ahsoka is over there?
I didn't know that until today when I was looking at the IMDb. It didn't sound familiar to me at the time, so that's an interesting thing, because like harassment at the level, especially, you know, at the power caller in any company level, I'm sure is happening all the time, but you almost probably look past it because you've reached this stage where you're probably rich enough where you can kind of look past it. And usually it's going to be like the white man doing this to his secretary or the other female in the office. So you're right. I think it's a good way that they flip that on its head.
I really did love, Riley makes everything so boiled down and simple. Like there was two things that kind of came to me as I was watching it this time, because they allude to like other companies like maybe existing, but for the whole of the movie, there's only two companies, and it's sort of like production and distribution. And so like all production is done in like the worry-free like little slave factories. And then like all distribution like happens through Regal View, this telemarketing company. It's like whether you're trying to sell encyclopedias to a woman who's like husband's dying of cancer, or you're selling like phone production to like a guy in Guangdong, or weapons, whatever. It's all happening through like one company. So you're able to like pack all these metaphors in.
Right.
And then it makes, like the idea of power collar is just synonymous with the idea of ladder climbing. And that they made it really, really clear and easy to understand. Like you mentioned earlier, that the protagonist, the person you're supposed to connect with the most, is not on the left so much, and they're not necessarily on the right so much. Let's say on the side of capital, they are just being individualist. They're like, it's about their individual well-being, and that the idea of power collar is this thing that is regimenting Cash's behavior for the sake of his own betterment. It's the carrot that's always dangled in front of the working class to keep them productive, efficient, and not caring about what anyone else is doing. Because if I can do it and I can get there, then everything's good.
Would you say that, this is a question for both, would you use this term to say what Cash kind of does when he is climbing up to become a power caller? Would you say it's selling out? Or would you say, is that like too, I don't know. Would you say that selling out, or is it simply doing what you have to do to get by, and you realize he has this ability and he just kind of goes with it?
I think it's supposed to. I think it ultimately is selling out, but I think it's supposed to be. It's supposed to make you feel kind of like, what else is what else would he do? Like what else is he going to do about his problems? Like, he still does have real financial problems, and he still does really need a job. And it does kind of juxtapose this interesting conflict around like striking and what that looks like for people in the long run, and kind of the challenges of, this is how I choose to perceive it in this movie, because I don't want it to be making a mistake. Like it shows how difficult the decision of striking is for people who are living paycheck to paycheck.
Dangerous.
And is not supporting the strike, or not saying something bad. Like, he's not going to do anything negative, but he's going to try to remain Switzerland. Like, that's his thing. I'm just going to go inside, make money. I'm not going to talk bad about Yao. I'm not going to talk good about them. I'm just going to go in and just do my job to make money, because I have to take care of my family. So at that point, in the beginning of the argument, almost, it doesn't feel like it's selling out. But when they do the time jump, and you see like him get his new apartment and all that, and he lives in this like high up floor apartment, and he has a Maserati. And so like he bought his uncle's house. He's clearly made all of his money like hand over fist at this point. At that point, when they ask him for help, and they're like, if you flipped right now and joined with the union, stood with us, it could change everything. We might be able to, like, the movie positions it like, if they did that, they would be in talks immediately. Like, this would change everything for the company. The company would start to lose the strike, and they would have to negotiate at that point. And he turns them down. Like, at that point, it's like, okay, dude, you're a sellout. You have more money than you need. Now we're just heading into greed. Now we're heading into like karma territory. Like something bad should happen to you, right?
Oh, sorry, go.
No, you're good, man.
No. It was just something, I had it in my notes, and it was degrees of wealth and sociopathy. Like there's all those studies that show empathy, compassion, and like lessening, and sociopathy increasing at higher degrees of income and wealth.
Right.
So it felt like very emblematic. But I think I agree with you. It's a sellout. I think you are supposed to empathize at the very beginning that it is supposed to be this like necessity thing, like I got to provide, I got to whatever. But there is that clear shift where you're just like, well, now it's not that. Now it's not that. Now you're just like ego driven, wealth driven, accumulation driven.
Yeah.
Right.
Agreed. And
It's
I
like,
think
I'm melting.
I
I'm gonna
don't
go
remember
for
which
my
one you mentioned. Squeeze, who's like he's played by Stephen Wen. He is working at the off. We kind of slightly skip past him, but he's working at the office at Regal View to essentially organize a union and to bring them to go to strike. And you kind of see now like the underlying theme of, well, one of many themes of this movie, of the idea of the power of labor versus a company as large as Regal View. And then you also see scenes of protest in front of the Worry Free Corporation and headquarters, or where, whatever their office is in Oakland where this takes place. So they're building also this narrative of organization and unionizing, which is pretty rare in movies in general. I can only think of a few, like Newsies, Norma Ray. That might be the end of the list.
Yeah, well, just before I forget, because it's not going to feed into any other time. Did anyone notice when there was that shift where it was like, it was like an ad for Worry Free. It was like, baby daddy, like prove you're like a good person or something. And he had like a 40 and like a whatever in his hand. And then it got graffitied and it turned into the Huey Newton picture.
No,
yes.
I did not notice that. Oh man.
Yeah.
That was the first time I saw it. I was like, oh, what? But back to the unionization thing. I think there was two components. I think you're right. You never see the idea of collective labor really, really being pushed. And I think that, Ryan, you brought up a really amazing point, which is that it's a terrifying thing to do, that there's so much risk involved. And for most people, that risk isn't worth it because there's so much unknown. And if we look at history, most of the time strikes and worker organizing gets crushed because we have little time. The owners have a lot of wealth that they're sitting on. That wealth is time. That's the ability to wait out for the best deal. With the WGA strike right now, they're like, we're going to resume talks in October when you guys are poor as shit, you can't afford rent or food, and now you're desperate. And so there's always that reality that the owning class can wait for your desperation because they got time. Like the other thing is that capital doesn't just have time, but they have force. And so you see in those moments outside of Regal View where they're striking, they're picketing, they're doing their whole thing, that you have some sort of like pseudo in between the Pinkertons and the police that are they're legally able to, there's no sense of like them like going beyond like excessive force or whatever. It's just like there's nothing said, it's just what they're able to do, and they're literally beating the shit out of people. Like people are like looking like dead on the floor after the scabs go through. And I think that those were two really, really important, but like in your face points about the idea of organizing.
Yeah. The thing that they do to begin with, I feel like they slowly increase what they're doing. Like the first thing they do is the 20-minute like work stoppage where they stand up put down their phones, stand up,
phones down.
And that's the only time I think that Cash participates. Like kind of
reluctantly.
Yeah, I was gonna say reluctantly, like participates. And the managerial class is freaking out. And the thing I wrote in my notes is that's just like I think they start shouting things like we make the profit and you don't share. You make the profit and you don't share. And like they need their basic necessities. Fuck you, Regal View. And it's
Regal View.
And it shows. I think you said both. It's the power that they have, but also the limit of that power unless it's someone like Cash, when he becomes a power caller, can join you, it kind of makes your point, not your point. It improves your bargaining power when you have someone like that on your side.
Did you notice, as you said that, it made me think about it, how abrupt the switch was. So they're like, bones down, and it's like, fuck you, Regal View. And right as that's happening, the sort of like really scummy tatted manager comes out, and he's like, fuck you, to like the people that I guess he deems the ones that are like organizing everybody. And then it's like a hard cut to people going in and out of the office where Cash is about to go in.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's, once again, like, you can read into it as little or as much as you want to. But it just made me think, it's like, that's probably Capital's response. It's like initially being like, oh, fuck, like, I'm worried. But then immediately being like, we can take this down pretty easy. Because the next thing was like, how do we flip a power player in this organizing effort and just take him out of the mix?
Yeah.
I like that because like the next scene, I think it's the next scene is the art show scene, because he ends up going through with the super violent escorts, and Tessa Thompson's character leaves him, but he's still, I think he's drunk when he does it. He goes to the art show, but something he says to her before that. Oh, it's when they were arguing that morning that I took this note down. He yells at her for selling art to rich people, because like when they were going back and forth with that conversation of like, is he a like he's doing it so that they could have a better life, he's trying to provide, that's why he's still going to work, like he has to go to work because he wants to provide, and her saying like
he says he did it to be more interesting to her, which is like connoting his monetary value with his personal value.
Oh, right. He did say that too, and she thought he was more interesting before, and all this, but the way that she kind of talks down to him a little bit about, you going to work there's bad and all that, and he snaps back at her like, well, you're doing the same thing out here selling art to rich people, and I just think it's interesting that in this movie, he didn't even let the arts get away. Like, it's pretty easy for people in creative spaces to look at an office building and be like, yep, that's where the evil people are. But if you're an artist and you have this really expensive show and you have access to all of these tools or these elite schools that we start to go up the same capitalist pipeline anyway, just the product is more homegrown, and you like the guy at the bottom, but he's selling his art, and there's an agent getting a cut, and an agent's getting another cut from something else for bringing the art there in the first place. It's a whole money machine behind even that world, and I thought that was an interesting thing to point out, because the only time that we hear her white voice is when she's selling her art to somebody. Yep. She's having a negotiation, and that's when she uses her white voice, and then she switches out of it to yell at him, and she does it during her performance piece. She uses her white voice then, and that's the only time that we hear it for the whole movie.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a good argument there of just like the commodification of art in general. Like what I think is also cool is that Detroit's character had some of like the coolest earrings. She had one that said, "Tell Homeland Security we are the bomb," was one of them, and she had her shirt, I think, said
murder,
future is the female is female ejaculation.
Yes.
And like all of her, but she would be the character in this movie, I feel like you would say, like, is the leftist person who understands what's happening, what these companies like Worry Free are doing. But it's easy to just kind of look past it, right? Because you don't want to believe it.
Okay, if she's the leftist person, then what's Steven Yeun know? Because
true,
like, I think there's something to be said. I can probably say this. I mean, I think actually we could maybe all say this because like we're like content creator kind of people or whatever. I want to be, I'm trying to be like a little bit more on the ground, actually organizing. And I guess there's something to say, like, is there like something that's better to be doing? Should we be doing that versus this? It's something I think about all the time because like literally yesterday I made a video about like the WGA thing, and this person is clearly a leftist. Like they're like, why don't you shut the fuck up and like direct me to the strike fund? It's like, well, you could Google it, but
right.
he basically was saying like, why don't you like stop like making content or like making, I guess in this context, like art or whatever, and go towards like real material action, I guess. And it is, I think, a real fucking dilemma for artists and creators at this moment in time, because we do need to like get our bag to like exist. And sometimes getting your bag, even if we can make it okay because we're making leftist content, we're making sort of like propaganda of sorts, we still materially benefit from that work. Whereas maybe someone like a Stephen Young organizer might not be, it's maybe there's more risk, there's more on the line.
Yeah, I mean, you get the sense from his character that he's done this before.
Serial organizer.
Like he's someone who goes to places.
He goes, business to business, and doesn't. I knew some guys that did that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty commendable thing to do. To it's hard. I mean, to let alone to get people on your side and the whole thing. But it is interesting. One scene that we didn't mention, or maybe I think we might have gone past it. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie. You mentioned, Ryan, like when he goes to the elevator and he's going up, like the entire elevator to him meeting the people upstairs is just completely batshit crazy. Like the coach he puts into the elevator is like 30 keys long, and they go up to the top, and like she doesn't go in, and they have all of the people in like these little rooms selling, like weapons and all this, and it's just, and it's fancy, and they have I don't know, it's that whole scene was just on the nose again, but just you don't feel it.
I was thinking about, because I think we're up to the party, the worry-free, and I'm curious what you guys think. Is worry-free supposed to be Walmart or Amazon or Wamazon?
I think it's a composite for all of the, like, I think, market share heavy companies that are running our lives.
I thought of it as Amazon only because it seems like what they're doing is kind of like creating like a company town of slaves. And I think of like Amazon as doing that in other places. And I guess Walmart does it kind of too, where a town relies upon that one place as employment and everything. And so one thing I want to mention about Worry Free is they have a clip on one of the news channels about like a Senate hearing or something, and the Senate was like, "Oh, there's no slavery at Worry Free."
It's not slavery.
Yeah, I saw that.
And I think it's just funny because it's like slid in the idea that like the government essentially is just allowing this to happen because it's quote unquote good for business, right? Because that's what the side they're on.
Well, so I think there's two top tier critiques of this movie. There is the idea of collective labor, collective action. And then the second one, I think, is about like the extents that capital will go to maintain itself and to increase profit. And the maintenance of itself, clearly you're seeing the majority of the characters in dire financial straits. They're all fucked. And then you see Worry Free as like, I think there's something that's kind of crazy about it, but it's not so crazy. The idea that if people can't, and we're seeing it now because no one can afford housing or rent anymore, is that a company could step in and market this thing, which is effectively a little slave factory that you sell your life away to, because I think the word they said was 3 hots in a cot. And
like prison.
It's prison. And
prison.
I immediately thought of like homeless people that will they will attempt to get arrested so that they get a place to sleep and meals. And I think there's a space about desperation, what people will do. And in that interview that Steve Lift, is that what his name is?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Jobs.
Yes, Steve Jobs, Steve Lift, that he does, where he's like, there's no threat of violence here. It's like, how could it be slavery? There's no threat of violence. And the obvious counterpart is the idea of systemic violence, the idea of economic violence. That what's different between me putting a gun to your head and me depriving you of all resources and and subsistence so that you would just die out like that? Like, really, what is the difference in the two types of violence?
Capitalism is violence, so yeah.
And then obviously the jokey, less obvious, but honestly makes sense, was the Equisapiens. They're like, and how are we going to make our labor more productive? Literally turn them into horses.
Yeah. Oh no, but you. What's that? Go ahead, Ryan.
I was gonna say, we're the workhorses too on the nose. That was the part of the movie that I was like, is this the line? Like, have we reached how self-aware this movie can be? Like, I think we're done here.
Yeah. Well, the whole party is crazy. Like that. Like, I feel like this is like the third act, to the point where like he goes and he has the meeting with Steve Lift, but everything about that party was, I mean, I feel like it was also to make, it was very much making a point to, it's a party of mostly white people, and they're making the one black guy there basically be like their entertainer, like that they can both like laugh at, but also because he's not one of them. And like I don't know, they're dehumanizing him like they do on that show. Like, let's kick the shit out of you, whatever it was called. I feel like they really dehumanized him at that party, and it's almost hard to watch.
Oh, it's so hard to watch. I'm afraid to ask this because I actually only got to the art scene. Oh wait, I remember what the rap ends up being. Never mind. I'm gonna leave that over there. I just remember I was like, what was it? Because I was like, it was really bad. It was really bad.
And they do it for so long.
I think it's
they do it for so long
straight.
Yeah.
And I think I honestly, like, I thought about it. It was funny. I walked out of the room for a second, and my wife was like, "This is the part of the movie that you specifically need to talk about. You got to remember this." Like, so rewind it. And I completely forgot about I knew that they made him rap or dance or something, but I forgot what he ended up doing that they applauded and loved. So watching that again, I was like, man, like, they're just packing like all their race conscious like things. I think he packed into like 4 solid minutes that are so very disturbing. Like, if you like just to watch, like, that part, I think is supposed to last that long because he wants the audience to be uncomfortable. Like, at first you'd be like uncomfortable and kind of laugh and be like, oh man, I can't believe they said that. And then you keep watching, it keeps going back and forth, and you're like, man, all those people are just repeating them. And like, man, and it just feels like it's like, this is so much and so long. But I think that is the point. Like, the point is like this kind of meta analysis of it. Like, the anti-racism is supposed to punch the audience watching this movie in the stomach and make you feel as uncomfortable as he should be feeling in this moment. Like, everything that he's listening to.
Doesn't he refer to him as like an Oakland gangster? I think that's like the Lift guy refers to him as Oakland gangster.
When he introduces him,
and it's like he's making him like a symbol of like all black stereotypes. Is kind of the note that I wrote down, is just he's entertainment to like the CEO, whatever his title is, that he's using to also allow like the white people to be able to do something they normally wouldn't do too, I think. I don't know.
Yeah. And I liked just kind of this observation as well of like the consumption of especially rap and hip hop music, like the consumption of black music or black music being boiled down to just that like like when I heard like when I heard what they were saying, it almost sounded like this is all a
White people
racist,
here.
yeah, like a racist white person listening to hip hop hears that. That's if you were to ask what was the song about, it would be that. That's what the song was about. And like that's how it came across was like this observation at the same time of like this is how like the consumption of this is negativity. Like that's what they wanted to see was him like at his worst doing like his worst weird random thing. And did you guys catch what what's his name? Steve Lift or whatever what he called him? Like right before that scene, he goes in and he said like, "Oh, thank you so much for having me at your party, Mr. Lift." And he was like, "Never call me Mr." And he was like, Lift, Steve?" And like and then he hugs him and he's like, "I'm just joking, you call me whatever you want." And in that conversation, he says, "We need more people like you." And it's a real long, hard you, like more people like you at Worry Free. And then he says, we need more cunning raccoons." that's that's the only like random animal or whatever. He first says cunning raccoon. It cuts to Lakeith Stanfield and he like kind of makes a face, but he just lets that go. And it's like, oh, this guy can say whatever he wants to you. And it's going to start off with like these like social faux pas kind of like microaggression type things, and then it's going to go to full blown 100 people in a room are going to stare at you until you literally perform for them.
Yeah. And then one thing that happens after that scene is there will then start watching, which we forgot to mention, at one of the scab protests, he gets hit in the head with the soda can,
Yeah.
and it ends up being
Oh,
the
yeah.
viral video. And they're watching it at the party, like laughing at him as I think this like Lift tells him he wants to like see him in his basement
Office or whatever.
shady office down below.
Right.
And I think and I think he also, the funny thing is when he goes down to meet with him, I think the first thing he says, he goes, "I'm not evil." Like he has to qualify everything about himself as, "Oh, I'm not evil. I'm just a businessman. You know, I'm just."
He's just a cannibal.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think he said, Ryan, like this is the most on the nose piece is like he offers him what he thinks is cocaine, and the payoff to that is obvious in a little bit, but he like goes to the bathroom and sees basically I'm trying to remember who plays. I think Forrest Whitaker is actually the actor who plays the first Equisapien, the first one. Like when he sees him in the
really?
bathroom.
That's crazy.
I didn't know that again
Fucking
until now.
gnarly. I did
Or maybe it's
not.
just
I love
his
that.
voice. I'm not sure. And I think you said right. It's like Workhorse is the obvious thing, or just like the dehumanization, ultimate dehumanization of like a person.
Yeah,
of course.
We talked about it right before we went live. But in the world of Two on the Nose, I think it's really funny to speak to Boots Riley finished the script in like 2011, 2012, and it took him like 3 or 4 years to get funding. And when he finally got funding and he started producing the movie, Trump was like trying to get elected. And Steve Lift's like motto in the original script was "Make America Great Again." And he had to rewrite a bunch of aspects of the script because the world had effectively caught up with his extreme, like magical realism world. And he's like, well, now it's fucking Two on the Nose. And he had to change all this shit.
It's one of those things where I said this in another episode recently, is like dystopian movies from the 80s is just now. right? Like just now. Can you even make a dystopian movie anymore that's not like it has to almost be I don't know. Yeah, it's crazy. But the whole doesn't he also say he wants to make him into like MLK Jr.? Did I get that right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I wrote that then I'm like, what the fuck?
No, because effectively MLK is like actually what was a radical, but the way that he is represented culturally now is this extremely sterile figure that gets to regiment what the proper response to oppression, marginalization, unfairness generally, or lack of justice in society. It is this narrow version of what like MLK actually was. They're like, no, he was nonviolent. He just held hands with people on bridges and it was all chill. And then the white man in his good graces he was like, yeah, I see it. You bettered yourself and now here's some good laws. And that seems to be like the representation, at least the way that even Steve Lift looks at it. He's like, you're going to be this. You're going to be this sterile fucking idol figure that will keep our workhorses in line.
Yeah. Yeah, he's his. Okay,
I also just like with the Equisapiens, even the premise, like even so pulling out just a little bit more to look at it as in through another meta lens. Like I like that even them contacting Lakeith Stanfield's character, like Cash at all, means that they were already planning on treating the Equisapiens so shitty they would want to rebel. Like they knew whatever they were going to, like however they're going to treat this new group of people is going to be bad enough that they will want to rebel. So we will definitely need someone on the inside to stop that from happening. And it's like it hadn't started yet. Like the whole the full on like workhorse force hadn't started yet. So it's like it just thought it was so interesting that they planned to treat them horribly and they would want to do that. Yeah.
You know what? The other thing though is it's also very much, not to be like a dirty little Marxist about it, but the thing that I liked about the Equisapiens was not just the on the noseness of turning us into workhorses and like what if they could modify the working population to be what if they could modify the working population to be more productive, just pushing us to the furthest level of productivity possible. The thing that I really liked about it was the capitalism creating its own grave diggers sort of critique, which is they created these beings now that are much more powerful than all these other ones. Obviously, they were built to do the work, but now it's almost like they've given the working class this new weapon.
Right.
And I also liked that. Not to mention, I didn't really think about the idea that the planning for it.
Yeah. Well, clearly he had brought him there to dose him with the tainted horse cocaine or whatever
what do you
it
think
is.
do you think he meant to say something about the usage of cocaine there? Or was it just like that was just the idea of doing a drug and now it's this drug?
Yeah, I just assume like that's what like rich people would do at like a party.
Yeah. It's like, don't worry,
it's like
safe.
The ultimate drug that would be and he's like, oh, of course, I would never waste this. I would never do anything like to hurt you. Yeah. That's I think when he says I'm not evil, maybe. I don't remember exactly when he says it. But it's like, I think there's something also that happens after this. I wrote this down, but I'm not sure. Things like start to go crazy with like the protests and like the Equisapiens are like, saving them on the street. There's the violence, and I think they mentioned that like the workday stock then like goes up. Like all of this is actually like inflating the price of the company, which is like also an amazing thing.
I did not hear that.
Yeah, I caught that.
Like something like bad news
they did say
rises
that.
the stock. Yeah, and it's just like it's like the critique of this, and I don't know. I don't know if you have any. Like I said, you could talk just about the Equisapiens for a long time, just that one thread of it. But I don't know if there are any other notes or specific things you wanted to mention before we run out of time.
I got one last thing, and I think that it's sort of a return to the beginning when Ryan was talking about Cash as the centrist, and then we kind of went to like the PMC thing.
Yeah.
But in Boots Riley fashion, he tells us at the beginning what I think like every character is vis-a-vis their name. Cash Green. He is about his money. You know, Evan got me on this one earlier. Detroit, all of her art, all of her fashion, she makes it herself. It's the idea of domestic production. You know, and then obviously Stephen Yun as Squeeze, he is there to squeeze these companies, to squeeze the management, to force better things. It's like they're telling us at every single level, like what these main characters are.
And Kate Berlin's character last name is Deanna Debauchery.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all perfect.
But,
I mean, yeah.
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 She's Dirty Diana Debauchery.
Yeah. And then you have Steve Lift. I mean, I guess like lifting people out of poverty. I don't know.
Yep.
Something like that.
But
That's
yeah,
what he would say, right?
Steve Lift, he's lifting people up to not worry. But obviously speaking to the Steve thing of, you know, the classic capitalist that's seen in the best light, that you know, got his wealth off of you know, slave labor in China and cobalt mines in Africa. So
Right.
I like also how the power caller, they never say his name. They kind of like bleep it out. It's just Mr. Blank. It's almost like it's the idea that like this person at the top of a corporation is just like a faceless, nameless person it's going to continue. Doesn't matter who Mr. whatever is, right?
Yeah.
They're still going to sell their weapons.
Yeah, Mr. Blank could be anybody. It doesn't matter who he is.
Yeah.
He is Mr. Blank.
I don't know. Did you? Oh, you're gonna say something, Ryan? Go ahead.
Yeah, the one critique of this movie that I have is the way Cash is presented. Something I didn't notice the first time I watched it was that it took something happening directly to him for him to like make a change. Like him being afraid of that situation made him want to tell this like story. And then even that, like you said, like his name is Cash, he's about his money. He immediately monetized his popularity from being on the TV show and getting that video played. Like it's like a hard cut to him on like the Tonight Show or something, like he's on some talk shows or something like that. And it's like he's doing a press tour kind of trying to talk about this. And then he ends up going back to Squeeze and the other guys. But it's like it took him seeing how bad it was and himself personally and being scared that it was going to happen to him for him to finally join, like with class consciousness, finally stop being a traitor to his class and going back down with well, I think they said at one point the lowly telemarketers, us on the first floor, going all the way back down to those guys in order to just say capitalism is bad.
Yeah. Don't you think he's kind of just like representative if you're like run of the mill liberal, you know?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I started off almost saying like he's like a centrist, but I guess that's what I meant as your classic liberal.
Yeah.
100%. Is fine with the status quo as long as it's working for them. Mm-hmm. But as soon as it stops working for them, let's burn it all down.
But I think one thing that doesn't really happen is, which I think is also part of that realization, is you start to blame like the wrong group. Typically you're going to blame the people below you, right? Like it's their fault in some sense. You don't necessarily go to the capitalists. I mean, of course it's a movie where they kind of had to get to that point at the end where he reaches a level of class conscious, but I think it's always it shows like how difficult it is for that to happen, unless, like you said, Ryan, like something has to happen to you dramatically for you to eventually come to terms with your status.
Mm.
Ooh, I got one last little tiny quick observation. And it actually makes way more sense that you laid out like the names and like kind of the themes behind those characters and their names. Did
Mhm.
you guys notice that Detroit was interested in whoever was leading the most leftist charge at the time? Whoever was going to be doing something that would help her, that's who, like, she bounced back and forth between Cash, Stephen Young's character, back to Cash, because they like kind of exchange power roles and the like union kind of strike force. It was just like something I noticed right at the end. I was like, I thought she was with this guy, but now she was with him, and now she's with him, just going back and forth.
You know
And
what?
yeah, my wife pointed out, she was like, yeah, it's whoever's in charge. That's what Detroit likes. But now adding it to what you were saying about how Detroit it represents like the working American class, the let's bring it back home, let's build it ourselves. Yeah, anybody who looks like they're gonna bring us there, that's who I'm interested in. That's what I want.
100%.
I
When it
love
seems
that.
like it's working for them, they work with it. When it seems like nothing, they're ready to rebel, kind of a thing. I think that's pretty
Yeah,
powerful.
What have you done for me lately?
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
If he wanted to, he would.
Right.
Uh,
Not to be a dirty Marxist about
yeah.
it. But
All right. Well, I know we could probably talk for another hour, but I know we've kind of got to our last thoughts. But Ryan, James, you can find your content in the links later, and the Conscious Environment podcast and content. And James, you've got your socials and your Comrade Workwear line. And if you have anything you want to mention before we sign off.
Only thing for me is I got a tee in the online store. It's the All Power to the Workers tee, and for the next 6 weeks, 20% of my proceeds, which is probably going to mean I'm just paying for this, is going to the Writers Guild Strike Fund. So if anyone wants to pop over there
Cool.
and help support the writers, just trying to keep them afloat as much as we can.
Awesome.
cool, awesome.
And we can find your podcast, Ryan, wherever podcasts.
Yeah,
are made.
wherever you found this podcast, you can
Yes.
also just look up the Conscious Environment podcast, and you can check that out. Also, there's a podcast called Buffalo What's Next. It's a NPR spinoff, and I was interviewed on there. So there's a go check that out and support my local homies. But yeah, you gotta do a cool NPR interview, and it'd be nice if you guys took a listen to it.
Awesome. Well, you send me a link and we'll
Definitely go
include
check it
that
out.
as
Yeah.
well. But yeah, you've all been listening to Left of the Projector, and you can get this podcast in the same place all those podcasts. And we will catch you next time.
Thanks so much.